when to mix and how to mix is really your choice, but I encourage you to try building a rough mix as you go along, and every stage of the way tweak it a little more to get it more in position of being a final. You'll see that it really helps with the next overdub because you're actually hearing something that's going to be close to what it's going to end up sounding like. You can perform more honestly to it, and it's a little more authentic for the singer and the performer to play to something that they know how it's going to end up sounding, how they fit into the picture. If they didn't know what the play was and they were guessing all the time, it would be a lot harder if you were on a basketball team than knowing exactly where you fit in the whole scheme of the play. In general, we all know tools for mixing: level, loudness, panning left, right, solos, mutes on and off, automation, auto control parameters, compression, dynamic control, non-dynamic spectral shaping with EQ, tuning, time correction, performance correction, other effects, phasing, flanging. One other word about effects. I listed all of the time-based effects here: reverb, delay, phasing, flanging, chorusing, gates, and so on. I used to work with a couple producers that just wanted me to throw reverbs on things and delays on things and try phasing on this guitar, and it was all about using effects like salt and pepper. Let's just spice up the song a little, make it sound cool. It sounds cool, let's just throw it around here and try it there and so on, without any regard for what the song was about. When do you use and what do you use as effects? I've come to the conclusion that the song itself has to motivate you to do something. If there's a song about being lonely, reverbs make you feel like you're in a large space. It helps further the message of being lonely. Just throwing on random effects just because it sounds cool may work in a very short run, but not in the long run of making the message more powerful. Here's a great example. When I set up drums, I actually make a conscious decision. Am I going to set it up as an audience perspective, or am I going to set it up as if I'm sitting behind the drums? So if I'm sitting behind the drums, the hi-hat's on the opposite side than if I'm watching the drummer, because I think it's more engaging for the listener to feel as if he's sitting behind the drum kit and he's part of the band. You don't consciously think that, but you feel it. So it depends on what the artist is about, whether it's an intimate song, whether it's a non-intimate song and you're representing the artist to be on some huge stadium stage and you're watching it from the audience, or you're sitting in a living room listening to it. All of that matters so much. And it also should coordinate with what the message of the song is. I keep coming back to that because to me that's everything. And when I mix a song, I like to know from the writer what the song's really about, what motivated the song, what they were thinking when they were writing the lyrics, and so on. Because then I can understand what they're really trying to communicate, and then I can help that with the sonic picture of what I'm trying to do. I think that's really important. If I just look at it as a piece of music and I know what to do with it, I may miss the mark of what they were really trying to do. I can usually suss it out and immediately feel like, okay, it's this genre, I'm going to go in this direction with drum sounds. But it's better if I really understand what it's about. Signal flow for mixing, efficient use of processing power. That's one thing, especially on your laptops, that's very, very important. Efficient use of processing power, because your laptops only have so much processing, only have so much RAM, it can only do so much at once. So if you're on the net and you're in Word docs and you're also doing some music at the same time, your processor is getting very stressed, very overwhelmed by it. And if you have too many plugins and you got too much stuff going on, your DAW is going to start slowing down in terms of its latency. Slow down to have enough time to actually get through all the processing it has to do. Because as you recall, it's all about ones and zeros in processing numbers. It processes really fast, but it still gets overwhelmed if you try to ask it to do too much. The best thing to do is if you've got a huge mix and you've got a lot of processing on things, is bounce them with the processing on it and imprint the audio tracks with all this processing. So then now you just have audio tracks playing back versus all of the plugins on those tracks. And you can start eliminating a lot of processing power that way. You have to commit, but then you can always go back and change it if you need to. You never delete it, you just disable the unused tracks. And when you disable them, it takes it out of the processor, and the processor doesn't see it. It relieves some of the stress on the processor. So utilizing your processor properly, especially in these laptops, is really critical. setting up specialized processing on individual sound elements to do the correction and then go ahead and mix with those. Great example, I still do this just out of habit when I'm doing some auto-tune. I'll take a track, copy it, do my auto-tune, and bounce it to a brand new track as a corrected vocal. And keep the uncorrected vocal, disable it. If I overdid it with the effect, I can always go back to the original and fix it. But in the meantime, now I've got an auto-tune track and a process track, and I'll just use that in my mix, mostly to save processor power. Signal flow, and this is elemental for the people that are experienced mixers. Let's just say you've got a mix and you've got reverb and you want to use reverb on a bunch of different elements. When I set up a mix, I'll set up my track space, and then I'll set up my master fader, and then on the other side of the master fader, I'll set up some overall global effects. I call them global effects because they're the kind of effects that I would use on all sorts of sound elements. So I'll use a reverb, I'll set up a chorusing unit, and maybe a delay with a quarter note and an eighth note. And then those are the kind of basic standard effects that I can start with. And then I can go ahead and I can put that reverb on the drums, I can put it on the vocals, I can put it on the guitars, I can put it on the keyboards, and I do it through busing. I'll take and I'll set these auxiliaries up where they're receiving bus 1 and 2, 3 and 4, 5 and 6, and so on. And then each individual track I can send bus 1 and 2, and it goes to reverb that's assigned to 1 and 2. So I can use it as a global effect, so I don't use more processing power than is absolutely necessary. I will very, very rarely put processing like reverb or delay on an individual track. I'll make these global processing, and then on the individual tracks, I'll use things like EQ and compression, because that's more distinct for one exact sound element. There are times when I want to use a specialized delay on a vocal or a solo on a guitar or whatever. Then I'll set that up on its own auxiliary, specialized for that particular solo. So each individual sound element will be more likely to get an EQ and a compressor versus the global effects. So you see how I have this laid out on the board, which is what you can do in your DAW pretty much, is the individual sounds on the left and the master section, and then the effects on the right. That sort of keeps it in your mind organized pretty well, that the global effects are to the right of the master fader, and they're assigned to buses, and then each individual sound element can assign to any one of those buses and send over to the global effects. When I'm mixing, I generally put mastering software on the master fader, just so that I get a feeling that I know what it will sound like mastered. And sometimes when I'm in a rush, I just master it as I mix, but I don't recommend that, because you really need a separate session to master properly. So what I'll do is I'll put on all of the compression and EQ I would do in mastering on the master fader, and then when I bounce my mix, I take it off so that I can actually do it in a separate session, not in a mix session. Talking about the stereo master bus, these are some of the things that I actually do. I use a spectrum analyzer all the time. That's one thing that people don't realize, how valuable of a tool it is. A spectrum analyzer is worth its weight in gold, because you can really see if there's subsonics that you can't hear on your monitoring system, or if there's some strangeness happening in the high end that you can't hear. And if you look at mastered songs that you like the way they sound on the spectrum analyzer, you can kind of get a feel for what the spectrum analyzer should look like, and then you can make your own music correspond. So using your eyes and your ears is much more powerful than just using your ears, because then you're only relying on your monitor system and your judgment with your hearing. But I always use a spectrum analyzer. I look at kick drum sounds. There's times when there's subsonics in there that I would have never heard. So if I did a club mix with that in there, it would have blown up the system. It would just be so much low end that it would destroy the mix. You can tailor those things with filters and really take care of all that if you know it's there.